Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. This is Jay, and this is just a real quick video. It's quite funny. After taking someone in the GTR recently, after we got the shop's new McLaren, first thing they noticed jumping into the GTR was some of the noises that you get with this car, and it's part of why I love the car. It's very mechanical, it's very visceral, but if you haven't had one before and you're test driving one, it can be a bit of a panic. So here's just a couple of really quick tips if you're test driving a GTR on what to expect, what is normal, and just how to look out for any problems with the transmission. The handy thing with the GTR, of course, is that you have the Polyphony and Clarion developed infotainment system, and this gives you some really useful metrics, especially when viewing a potential car. So the first thing that you can see is right here we have a transmission oil pressure readout. Now when you select a gear, put it into drive, you should see the pressure sit above the red and sit fairly stably. Now what you tend to find, if there's a lot of debris in the transmission oil, it hasn't been changed, it's broken down, the transmission's been abused, you tend to find the pressure drops and you get a bit of fluctuation here when you sit in gear. The solenoids are quite sensitive to that. Your next tip is if you got it in gear and you're putting on a full lock as you pull forward, you should feel some clunking and some resistance through the front of the car. And that'll be when your wheels start skipping, and it's when the clutch plates close on the all-wheel drive system, sending drive to the front of the wheels. And basically, if your car's not doing that, your clutches have potentially overheated, they're slipping, and you're not getting any drive to the front of your car. The great thing is you can also flip to custom view 3, which I've called it, but you can assign the torque split readout. Now the torque split will show you if you're sitting in rear wheel drive or front, and as you accelerate from a standstill, you should see all-wheel drive engage, shifting the traction forwards, and then as you gain traction, reducing gradually down to rear wheel drive. And if you keep an eye on how this action is going, if it's jerky, if it's smooth, if it's consistent with the acceleration that you're making, then you know that your all-wheel drive system is operating as it should be. Another time to keep your eye on your transition oil pressure gauge is when you're shifting gears. When you shift, you should see a little blip and then it settles back down. If you find that it is continuously blipping up and down, it means that the car is struggling to select the gear. And you should literally see a blip as you hear clunks from the gearbox. Another good time to watch this is when you are in manual mode. Put the car into about third and come to a stop. As the car switches from third to first, you should see a little blip. If you see it scattering all over the place, you know the car is struggling to select that first gear. As I said, the noises in the gearbox to this car, I've taken out the rear carbon panels that I normally have fitted to this car so you can hear the sounds even better. But it's sort of a feature of this car, it is very loud and clunky. So if you select reverse, for example, and then again into first, you should expect to hear that clunk very prominently. What's more so, if you reverse the car and you put a full lock on, it's very normal to hear those clunks going on as your clutches engage and your diffs kick in front and rear. But a top tip, if it does bother you, you can flick your diff to save and hold that down. And when that is flashing, now your front differential is now not going to kick in. So now when you reverse, tend to find it's a lot quieter. I'm not sure how well you can hear the difference, but it's quite significant. So the point is, when you reverse these cars, especially when you put a full lock on, as the wheels skip and the diffs do their magic, you will get a lot of clunking, and it's perfectly normal in these cars. When you want to really worry is, I hear a lot of people saying that they put out of spec differential oil in to make the diffs quiet, to make the gearboxes quiet. They put a thicker transmission oil in. Big no-no, and typically I will walk away from a car if an owner says that they've done that to me. And I also use your ears. If you can hear that the car is very quiet, as much as it might sound like a good thing, it generally speaking means or indicates that they have put a different spec oil into either the diffs or the gearbox. The reason why that is a problem, I've drained a GTR which has had about 30,000 kilometers on it, and they had done just that. Changed the transmission oil, changed the diff oil out of spec to make the car quieter. When I drained it, there was a significant amount of metal shavings in there. Now, at 30,000 kilometers, it's probably not severe enough to be a big problem, but your transmission oil should be nice and clear. You shouldn't be shaving bits of metal, and that has happened because the gearbox hasn't been lubricated well enough. The problem is the valve packs in these cars do, in the best of them, need cleaning out every now and then. If you've got one that's covered in metal filings on the inside, it's indicative that you're going to be doing that service probably a lot sooner than you would have hoped. And what you should also note, ignore the error that I'm having with my TPMS monitor at the moment, but as you accelerate and shift, due to having the dual clutches, what's happening is one clutch should be preparing the odd side of the gears and the other clutch should be preparing the evens. So that means you should literally have a fairly seamless transition, which is what DSGs do. It's not like the old-fashioned single clutch automated manuals where you get a really jerky gear shift, because they are effectively manual gearboxes with some automation involved. So you have to excuse the real amateur video. The camera is literally glued to the top of my wheel, but you should have a fairly seamless shift up and down. If you find that you're getting real vroom, vroom, vroom sort of jerky shift, almost as if you're playing around with the throttle as you shift, then you know there's something amiss. It could be synchros, it could be clutch packs. That's just basically something to really look out for on a leggy GTR that might have had a bit of track abuse and all those sort of things. So that's it. That was just a couple of really quick tips. I tried to keep it as simple as possible, not get too technical. But some real quick tips to go equipped with if you ever are test driving an R35. The first time I drove one on the road long term was actually this car. I bought it around 2-3 years ago. Before that, I'd only driven them on the track, and you just don't get the full experience when you sort of got your helmet on and you go in high speed, and you just sort of, it wasn't my car obviously, so I was just going with an instructor. You don't quite experience some of the nuances that are there when you come to buy the car. So the first time I drove this car, it actually made me panic a little bit, because it was just making all this clunking and all these noises I weren't familiar with. And since getting the McLaren and jumping into this, it really accentuates some of those noises and clunks and characteristics of the R35, which some people don't like it for, but I think makes the car. It's why I love it. It's very mechanical, it's very raw, and it's very race car-ish. So it's what I love about the car. But it is good to know when it is being normal and when things are a little bit abnormal. And it's sort of a bit of a backwards mindset, but some of the clunks and noises and rattles and things are actually reassuring that the car is functioning as it should. And generally speaking, when some of those noises aren't there, it means that someone has done something to remove them, which could inadvertently be adding a bit of wear to your gearbox. So always ask the question. If you can't go as far as inspecting the transmission or inspecting the diff oil, just ask the question to see if they have changed those to an out of spec oil. Do your research on the oil, see if it's too thick, too thin, and that will give you a good lead to the general health of the car. Of course, this car has Ecutech, so I can hook it up and run some additional tests, but the in-car entertainment system does give you some really accessible metrics that you can read in your transmission oil pressure gauge, your transmission oil temperature gauge, to see if it's getting up, sitting to at least 75, sitting nice and steadily on the pressure, getting only little blips when you change gear. When you go from third to first, make sure it's not accentuated, it's not struggling, and also check your torque split gauge just to see how that's interacting as you negotiate some corners, as you pull off on some tight turns in a car park, as you get up to say 15 miles an hour, throw a tight turn, you should see the torque split sort of dive about, and you should feel the wheels locking, and almost as if you've sort of put the brakes on and ABS has kicked in. That's the feel that you should be getting when you try to corner tightly at low speeds in a car like this. So hope it helps, and until next time, take care.